Today we welcome Michael Woodworth Fuller. Has a long, Michael has a long history of accomplishment in the theater world and in education, teaching and directing at many different levels. You can read about it all on his website at michaelwoodworthfuller.com. But he's here today in his capacity as an author to debut his first book, Legacy, which seeks to explore the always timely topic of how we respond to violence and the long-lasting consequences of war.
This is not a light summer read. In fact, for some of you, it's tough. It's a legacy, which is the legacy of war that's inherited by those who remain. That's what it is. So I'll read a little bit. I'll read the first chapter, which is about 4 or 5 pages, and then I'll read 2 other chapters, which are 1 page each, throughout to get an idea, maybe. Okay. I am going to tell you who I dedicated this book to. This is for my father and my mother and all the vets. All of them. This is the first chapter. Peter John Carlisle Morrison. He had a name and a body and some kind of hands and face. Me. His breath burst upon the window pane that evaporated, revealing himself reflected by the bed lamp behind him. Gauzed lumps at the ends of his arms reached out for his swaddled face, its blanched infant wanting pierced by 3 black holes. He closed the one that was his mouth. The other 2 stared their undeniable truth. Grinding the sobs rising between his teeth, he swallowed them unsounded and turned away into a broken landscape of sleeping, wounded men. Yanked up from their blistered shadowland they hung, splayed upon pulleys, splints, and slings, tarnished sculptures of brittle metal inked upon an infinite ashen slate. Burned. They had all been burned. A screaming sea flung him toward their fractured shore, arching him to the height of its myriad small moons, whose rigid silver soldered his main silhouette to the wall. He hung there with them, a crucified bird etched in the light of eternal winter, the red pages of his flesh ripped to their last chapter of agony, whose final word was a high-pitched, inarticulate syllable he had never heard, not even from the dying. Maggots swarmed in his veins, hatching into long, transparent worms, writhing in the air above his head, sucking out his life, pulsing currents inside him. He beat at them, but they bound his blanched, padded pods to their boards and wound around his ankles, spread eagling his chrome skeleton, bouncing upon tendons of wire. They snapped. He hugged the worms to his belly and plummeted the 10-octave return to the screeching linen tide. He flailed, trying to walk on water, but the worms dragged him under to the vinyl snake gnawing its way inside his penis to fight his genitals and pop them. They fell away, taking the snake with them. He drifted directionless in a white void so compressed that pain was bliss. Who was that child crying? It was with him everywhere. A child crying for its mother. She floated to him, holding him. He flicked his cigarette lighter at her and yelled for her to get out of his way. The child cried louder. She put her breast into its mouth, silencing it. He yelled at her again to move from her doorway, but she continued to nurse as if he did not exist. He pointed his weapon at her head and screamed. She hefted her baby and looked up, her child mother's eyes deep and dark upon him, waiting. His chest turned over upon itself. Had he been hit? A backward rush was filling a sudden hole. Her trees were still growing green here, and her sky was blue above the flames of the village. It was afternoon, not another time of day. Its warmth hemorrhaging the thick tenderness of his life from the cleft beneath his wishbone, where he had crammed it with his guts, dark and forgotten. He dropped his lighter and lowered his weapon and stood in the ruin of her living place, the colors of his earth sopping up the confession of his lost child soul's innocence, whispering at her feet. And was he running? Yes, he was running. Running in relief from her eyes' claim upon his conscience. Running with his brothers pumping rounds point blank into the bodies of flat slanted faces and helmets charging from the jungle. His blood pumping with a white-joyed orgasm upon seeing them die. Planes came in low over the bouncing earth, bouncing from rockets and guns, and dropped dark shapes that skipped through the village, forming pools of fire. He flung himself down behind a tree, slamming his hands over his ears. Burning. They all were burning. Every name and face he had known and loved. Their cries were everywhere, crying to plead the dying, don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me, crying for their mothers. His arms and legs were pumping, running among his burning brothers. Old Baxter, old Miller, swathed in smoke at the child mother's feet, the hole in her floor betraying the cachet of arms that had been hidden there, she rocking maternal to them all, her charred child nestled in her smoldering lap, black milk pouring from her evacuated breasts. Oh child mother, oh Miller, oh Baxter. He threw aside the glowing thatch, his brother's flesh united with the child and its mother's scorching his lungs. He could not touch them. He could not touch any of them. The cawing of their names surrounded him. He walked through the flames, flapping flannel wings, trying to fly. Grotesque claws rent his camouflage skin. His hands, oh Jesus Christ, his hands. Jesus Christ, oh Jesus Christ, stab, stab, yes stab, oh stab of Christ, oh stab these white brides of Jesus, the virgin dresses rustling through country churches bright with the dandelions of summer. Running after them through the colonnaded corridors, he found them in the nave. Their veiled faces gathered around him, singing his nuptial mass. Peter and John and Peter John. Wrapped in fresh robes of innocence, he stretched to lift their veils and receive their kisses of confirmation. But they placed his hands upon the altar, sibilating sacred secrets of the Spirit, raising him to the dancing lights of Eden. Flashing up that effulgent long shaft with them, he repeated their catechisms in a voice he'd all but forgotten. But just as he was about to accompany them into the joy of being painless, bodiless, and free, he was clamped back down that spasmodic tunnel and rested with a white cry of complaint. Oh, there was such tenderness in the Peter John whispered behind the veil of the blue eyes. Was he a Peter John? Was there enough left of him to be a Peter John under her whose face he had never seen, whose voice was of all the voices of all the girls he had ever wanted? He reached out for her maiden breasts swelling with sweet milk to cool his pain. But she took his hands and held him, weaning him to her white world of waking. Morrison, which one of his brothers had spoken his name? The pat on the shoulder, the turning away, the gliding of gowns crisp in the stark silence. Triage. Had they left him to die? Peter John, Carla, Morrison.